What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. We're jumping into something that's heartwarming. It really, really, truly is the Christmas Truce. We've heard a bunch of different songs about the Christmas Truce. We've heard the tale of the Christmas Truce. This is the Christmas Truce. What really happened in the trenches in 1914. Get over show Imperial War Museums, all the love in the world. Tons of great content over there for you to check out. Let's go on the journey and see what we got. Prepare yourself for humanity at its finest.
In 2016, IWM was contacted by the family of one of the soldiers shown in this photograph. We now know that this is Arno Bohm, a German soldier standing alongside British troops from the London Rifle Brigade. They're standing together in the middle of no man's land during the Christmas Truce of 1914. This photograph captures a moment so unusual in the First World War that many people at the time and to this day believed it to be a myth. In the midst of a brutal, total war, how did this momentary peace come about? What impact did it have in the course of the First World War? And why did it never happen again?
We were in the front line. We were about 300 yards from the Germans, and we had, I think, on Christmas Eve, we'd been singing carols and this, that, and the other, and the Germans had been doing the same, and we'd been shouting to each other, sometimes rude remarks, more often just joking remarks. Eventually, a German said, "Tomorrow, you no shoot, we no shoot."
At the start of the war, many believed it would all be over by Christmas. However, by December that year, it was obvious that this was not the case, and thousands of families and soldiers were facing a Christmas of separation, grief, and hardship.
So for those soldiers who were in the trenches over winter 1914, the conditions would have got gradually worse and worse. So you got a lot of rain, a lot of frost, and the general living conditions would have been terrible.
But the British troops were not alone. In the trenches opposite theirs, sometimes only 30 yards away across the strip of no man's land, were German soldiers in the exact same situation.
There was lots of opportunity for each side to communicate with the other. And this was a regular thing which happened right from the start of trench warfare. But communication would often be in the form of soldiers from one side shouting over insults to those in the other trenches. But what was interesting at Christmas is that both sides actually started to communicate in more friendly terms. It really began with the Germans singing Christmas carols and setting up Christmas trees on top of their parapets. And so they came to very much empathise with one another.
I remember very well Christmas. I remember the Christmas day when the German and the French soldiers left their trenches, went to the barbed wire between them with champagne and cigarettes in their hands, and had feelings of fraternization and shouted they wanted to finish the war. And that lasted only 2 days, 1.5 really, and then strict order came that no fraternization was allowed, and we had to stay back in our trenches.
The last thing that they want, you know, and like, look, I spent a lot of time over in Afghanistan, and I've seen some things, and I could never imagine this being the case. Like, I would definitely not a time that I would have wanted to been alive. These are people we couldn't even imagine to fill their shoes, just like hardcore. But I can't, of course, the people up top, they're at war for whatever reasons they're at war for. Like, they don't want you talking to the enemy. They want you on they want you to be a killer. They want you to be fighting. They want that to happen. They need that to happen in order to accomplish anything. They don't want you to just be rubbing elbows with the enemy. You're not there for that. You're there with the mentality that, hey, they're going to shoot at me and I'm going to shoot at them. Once you get together and you start realizing, hey, all of this could have probably been worked out had someone come to a table. If you sit down, a lot of these war situations probably could, like this obviously was a different kind of war, there were actual people doing actual things to liberate countries and things like that, and there was a lot of atrocities going on. But once you realize that the people on the other side are just people, the soldiers don't want to fight. They see the hell day in and day out. Of course they want it to end. Like, I don't know how you would go to this and then flip back onto fighting mode. I in my mind, that's what's always been the problem with the Christmas Truce. It's like, how do you become somewhat friendly with the enemy and then turn around and then start firing on each other again? Obviously you're there to do a job, but it's just so complicated and convoluted in my mind. Like, I can't imagine it.
The Christmas truce varied in different parts of the front line. Ceasefires were hastily arranged, sometimes to enable the collection and burial of bodies or to allow the trenches to be repaired. In other cases, the soldiers simply enjoyed fraternising with the other side.
And we shared fags, goodies with the Germans. And then from somewhere, somehow, this football appeared.
Was it a proper football?
It was a proper football. But we didn't form a team. It wasn't a team game in any sense of the word. You know, it was a kick-about. Everybody was having a go. It came from their side. It wasn't from our side where the ball came.
How many people were taking part, do you think?
Well, I should think there'd be at least a couple of hundred.
Did you kick the ball?
Oh, yes, I had a go at it. I was pretty good then, at 19.
But while some parts of the front line were playing football and swapping stories, others were confused by what they heard or felt no inclination to socialise with those they had so recently been fighting.
After a few moments, there were lighted objects raised above the German parapet. The Germans were shouting over to our trench. There's no doubt about that at all. And before we could take any action or do anything, we were ordered to open rapid fire, you see, which we did. The Germans did not reply to our rapid fire. They simply carried on with their celebrations and were having a very fine time indeed. They certainly were not going to do it anymore. They thought that we were idiots, I suppose we were. Well, not us, but the command, you see.
The way
Command
that
is always
warfare
the
was
idiots.
organised in the First World War, each sector was very distinctive, and so you wouldn't necessarily know what was happening in the sector next door to you. And you do get stories of one area of the front where they're experiencing a truce, but then suddenly they get fired on by the troops in the next sector who don't realise what's happening.
For those soldiers not involved, the truce must have seemed unbelievable, and even more so for those back home. For months, the media and government propaganda had shaped a perception of German soldiers as bloodthirsty enemies, baby-eaters, devils, ruthless killers. But news of the remarkable Christmas truce soon spread abroad. By the end of December, letters and photos arrived home, and newspapers began to publish accounts of the truce.
My father was delighted to have a letter giving such a description of events, and he sent them up to the Daily Telegraph. I got into a frightful rocket. That showed up that it must have been me who wrote it, and Mossy got hold of me, gave me an awful dressing down for daring to write to the press. But of course I didn't. My old man wrote to the press.
These photographs were taken on personal cameras that some soldiers had taken with them into the trenches. Photography in the trenches was discouraged for obvious reasons, but during the Christmas Truce of 1914, soldiers on both sides of the trenches could not resist the opportunity to document such a unique event.
At the beginning of January 1915, the newspapers suddenly start printing these letters. And to begin with, there was a certain amount of disbelief. But then over time, suddenly photographs started to appear as well. And by that time, the evidence was clear that this did happen. It wasn't a myth. And the media at the time absolutely loved it. There were lots of discussions in the newspapers about whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. And, you know, in a way,
At least there was
it's a
discussion.
wonderful snapshot of Christmas 1914 when attitudes were still slightly naive because the war had only really just begun. You find that in 1915 and onwards, the war becomes almost a much more serious endeavour.
The Christmas Truce would come to be remembered as something of a blip in the regular conduct of the war. It conflicted with the patriotic aggression required by both sides. It also served to highlight the great contrast between war and religion. How can you fight a war of aggression while also celebrating Christmas, the traditional time for peace and goodwill? For those reasons, the Christmas Truce was increasingly seen as unimportant and awkward to fit into the standard narrative of the First World War.
You never get anything like the Christmas Truce happening again. And over time, not only is it seen as an anomaly, but almost as a myth. And it gets to the point where people are actually doubting whether it happened in the first place, which continues, right up to this day. So there's still a lot of confusion about whether there was a football match played and things like this.
We didn't cross to France until March of 1915, but although it would be arrogant to say that the thing didn't actually take place, I very much doubt whether anything of the nature or magnitude that has been claimed for it took place at all. Now, the purpose of that barbed wire in the trenches was to keep each side in its own place. Therefore, why would anybody try to break that? And if anybody tried, what were the NCOs doing? What were the officers doing? I think the whole thing borders on the fairy tale and may be classed with the Russians with snow on their boots and the angels of Mons.
We know by looking at German newspapers that the Christmas Truce was covered there in a very similar way to how it was in Britain. In the 1920s and the 1930s, you see definite examples of how the Christmas Truce changes in its depiction, because there was a much greater emphasis then on the German soldier as a hero fighting a noble war, whereas the Christmas Truce conflicts with that to a degree. So in Germany in particular, the Christmas Truce goes out of favour definitely in the 20s and 30s, whereas in Britain it continues to be the popular celebrated story as part of the First World War.
The letters and photographs that reached home in Britain confirmed that this remarkable event had indeed taken place, but it was one that was not to be repeated.
The Christmas Truce was unique, and nothing like it happened again to that scale. And the reasons for this are varied. Immediately after the truce, the high command of both sides stepped in to make sure that fraternisation and ceasefires like this would not happen in the same way. But also, in the long term, the real reason that truces like this didn't happen is that the war changed in the way in which it was being fought. As the war progressed, centralised method of command, those in the front line would have been forced into constant aggression. You would have had artillery and trench mortar units constantly going, and also, of course, as the war progressed, it took a far nastier turn. So you get things like gas warfare introduced, an increasing number of civilian casualties. You also get incidents like the sinking of the Lusitania. The temptation, I suppose, to empathise with the enemy and the desire to fraternise with them changed dramatically from 1915 onwards.
It can be argued that the Christmas Truce made little difference to the course of the First World War, but it would be remembered as a crucial moment in history. The truce has featured in films, television programmes, inspired songs, and even featured in adverts. It's become part of the symbolism used when discussing the First World War, as synonymous with that conflict as poppies, mud, and war poets. This unique event has become legendary, in part because the idea of peace at Christmas in such an unlikely place is an irresistible story. But its enduring legacy is also due to these incredible photographs and the interviews from those who were there, documenting an event that to so many still seems wholly unbelievable.
Definitely one of those, like, it happened and there's proof that it happened, but it's still somewhat unbelievable, especially since I've been to no trench warfare. I've been to war, and it is absolutely hell on earth. And everyone is there, and it's really like none of the soldiers on the ground are really to blame. You get dropped off in a place and you get told, hey, people are going to try to kill you. And then survival instincts take in and you say, well, I'm going to kill them first. I can't imagine all of that stopping and humans just looking at each other like humans, regardless of which side they're fighting for, and coming together and taking a break and saying, you know what, no, it's Christmas, we're not going to do that on Christmas. I can see that it would definitely piss high command off, that they would certainly not ever want it to happen again. And they probably made quite a few examples out of the people that were there. I don't know, it's one of those moments where you just see the, hey, maybe in the midst of all of the chaos that's going on in the world, people can get together. People can look past their differences and look past their aggressions and say, you know what, we're all just people. It's one of those things that kind of gives me hope. It's a little drop of hope in a huge bucket of horror. And definitely it's an kind of inspiring tale. It's one that seems more like a fairy tale, because who would have thought there, of all places, there would be a respite, there would be a little stop, a little pause, a little show of just pure humanity at its finest. Definitely get over and show the Imperial War Museum all the love in the world. The link is right there inside the description, or it's popping up on the screen. I love hearing these old stories and seeing the old photographs, and it's heartbreaking. It really, truly is. Any war out there is terrible. But the World Wars 1 and 2 are, I think they stand out on their own. They are in a whole different league from any of the kind of wars that we're fighting nowadays. Back then they were fighting for a purpose, and there was like actually something that needed to be fought for. Nowadays, half the time we don't even really know why the hell we go to war. We just go to war. I don't know, different times, different kinds of warriors. I'm definitely glad I didn't have to fill any of those boots, for sure. Get over and show the love. The link's popping up on the screen right here. Smash the like button if you liked it. The dislike button, but it won't believe you. Till the next one, I'm the Combustible. You guys be happy, healthy, safe. Enjoy your Christmas no matter where you're at. I love you to the moon and back. Peace.